Welcome to the Striving for Eternity's School of World Religions. We're glad to have you with us. I am Andrew Rappaport. I will be your instructor this evening. This is a ministry of Striving for Eternity. We put on these academy classes. You can go to strivingforeternity.org to get information about this class or any of the others. They are available for free. That's right, for free on YouTube. You could watch these classes, but if you want to be a good student, just saying, you do, you can get a syllabus, and those are available at the website, strivingforeternity.org. You could pick up a syllabus and follow along with everybody else, filling in the notes and having a whole lot more than I often have time to discuss here. You also have a way of using that as a quick reference. Now, before we begin, I will say much of the what we're going through is based off of my book that I've recently written, What Do They Believe? A Systematic Theology of the Major Western Religions. And that as well can be purchased at our store at store.strivingforeternity.org. So you'd be able to pick that up if you want there. So with that, let us begin in our School of World Religions. We are starting in this class, which is an introduction to the major Western religions. The class that we're in today is lesson number 3 in your syllabus. This is Jehovah Witnesses. That will be the topic of discussion today. We're going to do a slight review, and then we'll go into what we're going to study today. As you remember from the last class, which, well, it's never good to start in the middle. You always want to start at the first part of a class. So you want to start in lesson 1, well, I guess in this case, part 1 of Jehovah Witnesses. But in the last class, what we discovered was we looked at what Jehovah Witnesses hold as their authorities. And we mentioned that they hold to the Watchtower, Bible and Tract Society. That's who does the interpreting of the scriptures for them. They will use a King James version of the Bible, but they have their own translation called the New World Translation. We looked at that. We saw some of the differences there between that and just some texts, but there are some differences in the way that they will translate things. However, I often, when I speak to a Jehovah Witness, I will use the New World Translation. Even though it does have some things that I would disagree in the way they're translating things, we're going to look at some of those today, it still is, for the most part, kind of accurate to the Greek and Hebrew. So it's for the most part a fine translation like any other. It's sort of like the King James. It's what's kind of modeled after, I think. And so, but what you end up having is that it is a translation of the Bible, like any other translation of the Bible. It's not going to be a perfect because it's a translation. So that's the translation that they would most often use. And so when we quote things here, we're probably going to be quoting from the New World Translation. All right. So that having been said, if you see NWT, that stands for New World Translation. All right. Now, we talked about their view of God. We mentioned that they do not believe in a Trinity, and we're going to see that in depth when we look into today's lesson on Jesus Christ and the view that they have of Jesus Christ. But they do not believe in a Trinity. Now, this is really, for many that enter into Jehovah Witnesses, they come from, say, a Roman Catholic background. They haven't been taught in the scriptures where and how to defend the doctrine of the Trinity. And so what ends up happening is very often someone comes to them from knocking on their door. Hi, I'm a Jehovah Witness. I have a Watchtower magazine for you. Would you take a look at this? And it seems like they have answers. It seems that when they look at the way that they have it structured, they have well thought out, at least seeming, argumentation against the Trinity. They'll take many passages of Scripture, they'll make their case, and many people mistakenly think, well, gee, it seems like they have answers to the Trinity, and the Catholic Church or Baptist Church or Lutheran Church, or whatever church they grew up in, who never taught them how to defend the Trinity, they think that because they've never been taught it, that they have no defense. we have a defense. It's actually a very easy to defend doctrine. But we're not going to look at that this week. We will, if you want to you're anxious to know how to defend it, go to our classes on systematic theology. We have, in those early lessons, we have lessons on the Trinity, and you can get that there. Or just wait a couple of weeks, and we're going to get to it. Actually, in about 3 weeks or so, maybe, we'll get to that. So we will cover it, and we will cover it in an overview and then in much greater detail. So let's start by looking at the Jehovah Witness view of Jesus Christ. Who do they say that he is? Kind of a play on words. Who do they say I am? That's what Jesus had asked the disciples. But if you look in your syllabus, we're under section 3 under Jehovah Witnesses for Jesus Christ. And let's start with the idea that they have that Jesus Christ pre-existed. So let's look at the pre-existence of Jesus. Okay? Now, this is different. I want to make a point. This is different than what we saw with Mormonism. Okay? Mormonism, it believed that all souls, every human being, pre-existed. Okay? This is going to be different. So don't make the mistake of thinking that because Mormons believe every soul that ever lived was born. That's actually, remember, what Judaism taught as well. But this is different. This is just that Jesus Christ pre-existed. So Jesus Christ, before becoming a man, pre-existed in heaven as the first and only direct creation of God. It's very specific, and we're going to get to that. Known as Michael the Archangel. So let's break this down for a moment. Jesus was the first of creation. That sounds similar to Mormonism, but it kind of stops there. Well, it doesn't stop there, because they would also say that he's the only direct creation of God. So what you see is that the idea being that God created Jesus, and then Jesus was used to create all things. So the only thing that God directly created is Jesus, and then Jesus did the creating of everything else. So the idea would be is that we could say that God the Father created everything through Jesus. Remember, this is going to be an important point we're going to get back to in a moment. But that is what you have to understand, is that God the Father creates Jesus. He's actually known at this time as Michael the Archangel. Michael the Archangel is then, who will later be called Jesus, is then used to create everything that exists. Okay? So before becoming a man, Jesus Christ was a mere angel. That's your blank there, a mere angel. It was through this created archangel that God brought all the other things into existence. So Michael, as Jehovah God's greatest creation, was created first, and then he ends up being used to create everything else. Now, where do we see this? Well, let us start in the New World Translation, shall we? This is the New World Translation's in Colossians 1:16 and 17. We looked at this last week. And I'm using one of their newer translations to point this out. And I'm going to point this out because this is something that in here they've changed it. Okay? This is the way it was first done in the earliest copies of the New World Translation. You saw it read just like this. For by him were all other, note the emphasis that I put there, other things created that are in heaven and that are in earth, visible and invisible. Whether they be thrones or dominions or principalities or powers, all other things were created by him and for him. He is before all other things, and by him all other things consist. Now, the word other you see there 4 times. Okay? In the 70s, they had to change this, and they ended up having to be a little bit more honest and show that the word other was added, so they put it in brackets. However, they've taken that out again in some of the translations. But nowhere in the Greek does the word other exist. Okay? That is not in the Greek. They've added that in because of their theology. So right there what you have is you see a clear example of where the theology is driving the translation. Let's realize, I would argue this is the same that happened with Anglicanism with the King James Bible. We have a word for baptize, to dip or to immerse, but that wasn't the way the Anglicans were baptizing. So what they do, created a new English word. Baptismo became baptize. And that became the idea. Now, that causes some confusion in some places, but that's what happens in translations. Someone's theology could affect the way that they do translation. This is a case with Colossians 1:16 and 17. Okay, because the Jehovah Witnesses have to add the word other that's not in the Greek text, because that is to support their doctrine that Jesus Christ created everything, including other angels, by the way. And he created all this, but not for God the Father. Even in their own translation, this is why I say, look at their translation. Even in their own translation, it says that he created all things for himself, not for God the Father. He created everything by him and for him. This is why I say you could use a New World Translation when sharing with Jehovah Witnesses. Because what you see is if you get one of the translations that have the word other in brackets saying that it's not in the Greek, you can show them this reads perfectly fine in English. You don't have to add the word other. The reason the word other is added is because of a doctrinal issue. If you read it, let's put that up and read it without the word other. Let's read it the way it would in one of our translations. For by him were all things created that are in heaven and that are on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or dominions or principalities or powers. All things were created by him and for him, and he is before all things, and by him all things consist. So you see, we don't need the word other to have that explain what's being said in the Greek. You see, adding the word other actually changes the meaning. And when you have a translation, the translation should never change the meaning of the text. Could it have baptismo or deaconos becomes deacon, because deacons were leaders and deaconos means a servant, and so that causes confusion. But they didn't change the meaning, they just gave it a new word. I think it adds a lot of confusion, and I don't think it's good for translators to do that. But here you actually have a translation that's changing the meaning dramatically. Okay? The word other does not appear in the Greek text, and the addition of the word does change dramatically a doctrine that the passage of the Bible is teaching. In the New World Translation, they do not always acknowledge the word other being in there. Now, if you get someone that shows where it's in brackets, you know that you can point that out. That word's not in there. All right? So that becomes important because what they're trying to do is show that Jesus Christ first created, then created everything else. And this is how they get around saying that God the Father created everything, but Jesus Christ created everything. Now, why do I say this is a real problem? Well, I would say this is a real problem because we have a passage in Isaiah 44:24 that says, "Thus says the Lord, your Redeemer, and the one who formed you in the womb, I, the Lord, am the maker of all things, stretching out the heavens by myself and spreading out on the earth all alone." That's right. Isaiah 44:24 makes it very clear that God did not share in the creation work. God alone did creation. So Isaiah 44:24 becomes a real problem to this view that Jesus Christ was created first and then he created all things. The reason that's a problem is because according to what we see in Isaiah, God alone did the creating. He doesn't share it with anyone else, including Jesus. Now, what the Jehovah Witnesses would argue is that God created Michael, Michael then created everything. That then creates a problem with what Isaiah is saying. You see? Let's take another verse of what they have here. This is from their book called Reasoning from the Scriptures, 1985 edition, page 218. And remember, Reasoning from the Scriptures is a book that they've written to try to answer the supposed problematic areas that Christians bring up. So this is really, how do you answer the Christian, the genuine Christian, the Bible-believing Christian that asks you questions? And so it says in there, so the evidence indicates that the Son of God was known as Michael before he came to earth, and is also known by that name since his return to heaven, where he resides in a glorified spirit, Son of God. Did you catch that? Yeah. So he was Michael. He became Jesus while he was on earth. He returned to Michael. So what they would say is that today, the person we know as Jesus Christ is actually Michael the Archangel. Okay? So that's what you have to realize. They believe that Jesus was Michael before, he comes to earth as a man, returns to being Michael the angel. So this is going to cause, I think, some Christians to go, what? I understand. But this is what happens when people try to answer questions that our human minds can't comprehend. This is what happens when you deny the Trinity that is in Scripture. And you deny that, and what ends up happening is in that denial, you end up having to answer questions. You can't. How do you get around the fact that in the Scriptures, God the Father is said to be the Creator, and yet you also see very clearly, as we looked at in the passage in Colossians 1, that Jesus created all things, that there was nothing that was created apart from Jesus. That's where you get into these dilemmas, and you have to start coming up with this stuff. And that's what you end up having. So let's look at the deity of Christ. Jesus Christ, according to Jehovah Witnesses, Jesus Christ is not Jehovah God, but instead a God, in quotes, a God. Now this is from John 1:1. Okay? The New World Translation, do I have that? I didn't number the slides. Okay, so just put the next slide up. Nope, that's not it. All right, so I will just read it. How's that? All right. Sorry about that, folks. I didn't give the slide, and I was bad and didn't label the slides, so they just have numbers on them, and the engineer doesn't know which one's which. So this is what it says. This is John 1:1 in the New World Translation says, quote, "In the beginning, the Word was, and the Word was with God, and the Word was a God," unquote. That's the New World Translation. So Jesus is seen to be on earth as a perfect man, and only spoken of as a God in the sense of being a perfect man, but not more and not less. So let's put that passage up that we did have up. So, and this is from Should You Believe in the Trinity? Jesus is no more and no less a perfect human, became a ransom that compensated exactly for what Adam lost, the right to perfect human life on earth. The perfect human life of Jesus was the corresponding ransom required by divine justice. And so what you see there is quite clearly... Is there another slide? Okay, let's put that up. That's not the one I was thinking, so let's hold off on that. All right, so the quote I was looking for is from The Truth Shall Make You Free, 1943, page 47. It says, "The true Scriptures speak of God's Son, the Word, as a God. He is a mighty God, but not the Almighty God, who is Jehovah. Notice the distinction there that they're making. So when they speak of God, we have to be careful, okay? Because as Christians, we're going to have a mindset there that we don't want to put onto them because it's not the way they would speak of this. And so because of that, we always have to be careful when we're trying to understand someone else's position that we don't apply to them something that they would not hold to. Okay? So when they speak of Jesus as a God, they're not arguing for polytheism. Okay? Polytheism is the idea of many gods. Many Christians will hear that and say, oh, so you have many gods. And they'll say, no, we have one God. They believe God the Father, Jehovah God, is one and only God. And that there are no other persons that make up God. So it's God the Father, the only person that is God. Now, Michael becomes this perfect being that becomes a God. So he's called God only in the sense that he lives a perfect life. But he, as you saw in that passage, is the ransom for us. Well, if he's the ransom for us, why don't we live perfectly anymore? I mean, even Jehovah Witnesses continue to sin. So how is, this is the question I would end up asking, is how is it that he could be that making up for what Adam did? See, when Adam sinned, all of us are now born with the curse of sin. Actually, Romans 8 says the entire universe is groaning under that curse and waiting for the day that God will restore those things. But here we see that according to this, Jesus restored everything, but yet not. And that's confusing, to say the least. It's confusing in the language to say he's a God, he's a mighty God, but he's not the Almighty God. And now in John 1:1, what they're going to argue, because in John 1:1 it says, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And their argument from the Greek will be, well, there's no definitive article before God, therefore it's not the God, it's just a God. And they're correct, there is no definitive article. But you don't need a definitive article to always be there to be speaking of a single person, or in this case, a single God. So the argument that they end up arguing for is that he's like a lesser God, but he's greater than man. Okay? That's basically how it ends up being. And what you see is, you see them also having some confusion with this term, Son of God. Okay? They often misunderstand Son of God as an offspring of God, because that's what son of means in our day and age. However, if you watch the way they speak, you'll see that they'll often do that. And yet you could turn to, say, Mark 3:17, that talks about James and John being the sons of thunder. No one is going to think that two lightning bolts got together, cracked, they made that cracking noise, and that sound produced James and John. And if you ask them, what does it mean that they were the sons of thunder? These Jehovah Witnesses will, I've never had one not say this, they will always say it means that they had the essence of, or the nature of, or the characteristics of thunder. They're loud and boisterous. They're just speaking very loudly. Oh, so Son of God means character of, essence of? Yes. So when we say Son of Thunder, it means that, then why not Son of God, meaning that Jesus is the essence of God, the nature of God, the character of God? No. There it means an offspring, a product. He's produced. Okay? Do you see the inconsistency? Son of can, in some contexts, mean the offspring of, but that's not the only meaning. So when we see the phrase Son of God, it does not mean that they are the offspring of God. But the Jews at the time wanted to stone Jesus when he was called the Son of God. For what? For blasphemy, because him being a man is called God. So the Jews who lived at the time understood when Jesus would use the term Son of God of himself that it was a terminology of claiming to be deity, and that's why they wanted to kill him. And the other phrase that causes them problem is the phrase firstborn. You see that in some passages, actually in Colossians 1, where he's the firstborn of creation. And they'll say, see, he was first created. And rather than seeing that as a preeminent or superior one. Now, in Jeremiah 31, in 31:9, and you'll see that Ephraim was called the firstborn. Even though Ephraim was not the firstborn, his brother Messiah was. You also see this in Genesis 41. In there, you end up seeing, this is where, again, it's referring to what's mentioned in Jeremiah. Okay, Joseph named his firstborn Messiah, or Messiah, okay? So if you look at that and cross-reference it, the firstborn was not the one mentioned in Jeremiah 31. In Jeremiah 31, Ephraim is mentioned as the firstborn. And so when you look at that, you have to realize that firstborn does not mean the order in birth, but it means a priority. It means that that they were the firstborn, they were the preeminent, they came before in the order of inheritance. Okay? That is the understanding. We have to take these things and understand what they meant at the time in which they were written. Okay? So we end up seeing that, let me give you some quotes though, support some of this stuff. In other words, this is from, let me give you where this is from. This is from The Kingdom is at Hand, 1944, pages 46 to 49 mentions this. It says, quote, in other words, he was the first and direct creation of Jehovah God, unquote. From Paradise Lost to Paradise Gained, 1958, page 164. This is the one that we read, actually, so we could just put this one back up. No, not that one. Sorry. Maybe I didn't have it. Sorry. Forget that. It says, quote, the Bible shows there is only one God greater than his creation by God had a beginning. I skipped a whole sentence. Let me read that again. Please forgive me. So this is from Paradise Lost, Paradise Regained, 1958, page 164. Quote, the Bible shows that there is only one God, greater than his Son, and that the Son, as the firstborn, only begotten, and the creation by God, had a beginning. That the Father is greater and older than the Son is reasonable, easy to understand, and what the Bible teaches, unquote. So notice what that reasonable to understand, that's their problem. They're trying to answer for a God that is beyond our ability to understand. And you always see this when it comes to the Trinity. People are trying to answer the question on that. I can't comprehend this. It doesn't make sense to me. This is not reasonable. God is greater than our ability to understand him. That's the first attribute of God that we looked at in the school's systematic theology. We looked at that to say that we looked at the attributes of God. He's incomprehensible. That doesn't mean we can't know what God reveals about himself. It means that what he does reveal we can know, but there's a lot more he doesn't reveal. Deuteronomy 29:29 says the secret things belong unto the Lord, but that which he has revealed to you, obey and teach to your children. So what you have there is the fact that we are to obey that which God has revealed, but he hasn't revealed everything. And so there's going to be things we cannot comprehend because we are not God. With that being said, what we want to do is recognize the fact that we cannot comprehend the Trinity. And people get into trouble when they try to get into the Trinity. So the next quote, I think, is the one that you had put up there earlier. Why don't you put that up? Is it the one from Should You Believe in the Trinity? No. That's the one that starts... yeah, that's not the right one. Nope, that's not the right one. So we'll get to those two. Sorry. So I'll just read this quote. This is from Should You Believe in the Trinity, 1989. Quote, "Thus Jesus had an existence in heaven before coming to the earth, but was it as the one of the persons in an almighty external triune Godhead? No. For the Bible plainly states, in the pre-human existence, Jesus was created spirit being, just as the angels were spirit beings before God. Neither the angels nor Jesus had existed before their creation," unquote. Now notice what's done. In that passage, actually, if you read it, you will see nowhere where they say that the Bible plainly states his preexistence. They don't support that at all. What they support is that the angels had an existence before men. So the issue that you end up seeing is and this is something I always watch, people say, oh, plainly. In other words, if you disagree with it, you must be dumb or something. It's very clear to everybody, any thinking person. That word is put there that basically, put into your mind the idea that this is very clear and very simple to understand, but yet they don't support it because the Bible doesn't clearly or plainly teach that Jesus had a pre-existence outside of being eternal. The Bible nowhere talks about him being created. It talks about him being firstborn, and because of their confusion on that, that's what causes the dilemma that they have. All right, let's move on so we can get through this lesson. The resurrection of Jesus Christ. Jehovah Witnesses believe that Jesus Christ was raised a spirit creature. That's your blank there, spirit creature. They teach that Christ's human body was not raised from the dead. His body dissolved into gases or otherwise annihilated. Christ permanently forfeited his human life when he gave it up for a ransom. For Christ to have taken back a human life would have meant that he was taking back the ransom price. So now we could put that verse up. Let God be true. Is that? No, the next one. There we go. Jehovah God raised him from the dead, not as a human son, but as a mighty, immortal spirit son. For 40 days after that he materialized as angels before him had done, to show himself alive to the disciples. Now notice what that is. So he had to show himself alive. So the risen Jesus, they would say that he appeared as a man to the disciples, because Thomas didn't believe. See, Thomas, he was doubting, he didn't believe, so he had to appear as a man for Thomas's sake. And I know I won't have this one, but let me see which quote that is. Oh, I'm looking for the quote. Well, I'll just read all. Let me finish this section, and I can read all the quotes. How's that? I don't miss any. So the risen Jesus, though, was obviously more than a man. Why? Because Jesus had divine qualities and status. Jesus, throughout his life, had divine qualities, attributes that only God could possess. But he had divine qualities, exact representation of God's. You see it in Hebrews 1:3. You see it in Colossians 2:9. He wasn't just a spirit. And therefore, he must be a spirit. John 4:24 says that he's a spirit. But Jesus was a spirit with some supernatural abilities. I mean, he was able to be invisible and be shown. And they'll argue that this is how they know he's just a spirit. But the argument is, they'll say, this is from Let God Be True, 1946 edition, page 276. Quote, the firstborn of the dead was raised from the grave, not a human creation, but a spirit, unquote. From that same book, page 41, quote, Jesus did not take a human body to heaven to be forever a man in heaven. Had he done so, that would have left him a little lower than the angels. God did not purpose for Jesus to be humiliated forever, but being fleshly man, however, no. But after he had sacrificed his perfect manhood, God raised him to deathless life as a glorious spirit creature, unquote. Now, do you see, the argument they're making is out of Psalm 8, where it says that man is a little lower than the angels. And they falsely get into the idea that if Jesus remained a man, he'd be lower than the angels. However, if they read Hebrews chapter 2, they would see that that says that he was lower than the angels for a while. Yeah, just for a short time. But he would be greater than the angels as he returns. He became a man, and men are lower than the angels, but he never stopped being God. And the whole book of Hebrews is to show the superiority of Christ. The first 2 chapters show that Jesus is superior to angels. He's not one of them and superior as one of them. The author of Hebrews makes the point that he's superior to them, period. All right, let's move on. From Paradise Lost to Paradise Regained, page 144. Quote, usually they could not tell it was Jesus, for he had appeared in different bodies. It appeared that he disappeared just as angels had done, because he was resurrected as a spirit creature. Only because Thomas would not believe did Jesus appear in a body like that which he had died in, unquote. So you see, because Thomas was doubting, he had to appear in a human body. I guess if he didn't doubt, he would not have been able to know that Jesus was God? No, risen from the dead. I mean, you just think of that and go, okay, there's a problem there. The problem that you have is that we end up looking at this and seeing that you have him teaching, or you have the Jehovah Witnesses teaching, that he had to appear in other bodies because he was a spirit, and he had to show himself. He actually had to put on his own body again. But where was his body? How did he put that body on? I mean, there's a whole lot of problems that we could see there. All right. Let's move on. After his resurrection, Jesus returned to be Michael the Archangel. We said that. Jehovah's Witnesses believe that Christ's invisible presence began in 1914, and we mentioned this last class. And this gets into their whole study of that the timing of the Daniel passage ends up leading to the end of 1914 is when the end of the Gentiles came. And so the issue here that we end up seeing, though, that we want to focus on is that they are seeing that he is a spirit today, not human. Now, we would disagree with this as Christians. We would see that Jesus is God all throughout. He never stopped being God. And that he became a man and continues to have a human flesh. But yet he's still God. Can I understand that? No, I can't. But I'm not God. Just saying. So let's look at the next topic if we could. The next topic is the topic of sin. What is the Jehovah Witness view of sin? This is a short one, so I think we can get this done in the next 10 minutes and wrap this up. We will have one more lesson to go. So, Jehovah Witnesses believe that Adam's sin in the garden caused death and condemnation passed on to... sorry, let me read that again. I'm reading my notes. Jehovah Witnesses believe that Adam's sin in the garden caused death, and the condemnation is passed on to all of his offspring. They would hold to a view of original sin is imputed to all people, unlike the Mormons. Jehovah's Witnesses teach that all men have a sin nature. I think that this may be from Life. Yeah, Life. This is 1929, page 194. This says, by the disobedience of Adam's sin became active, and he was sentenced to death, and condemnation resulted to all his offspring. Hence, all were born sinners. All were born sinners. So you see that they do hold to some view of an original sin. It is important to note in discussing the Jehovah Witness view of the eternal state that they do not believe that man has an immortal soul. And we're going to look at that next class. They believe that man is a soul but does not have a soul. That's a distinction. Let's put up the next quote. We could look at that. This is from Reasoning the Scriptures, 1985, page 375. They quote Genesis 2:7, quote, Jehovah God proceeds to form the man out of dust from the ground and to blow into his nostrils the breath of life, and the man came to be a living soul. Notice that this does not say the man was given a soul, but became a soul, a living person, unquote. And the emphasis that I have in that is original. That is what you see from there. So they make an emphasis to point out that man has a soul, not is a soul. What's that distinction? If he is a soul does not die. So he has a soul, but not is a soul. That becomes important because we're going to see next class, they do not believe that we live on forever immortally, but that if we're bad, we poof out of existence. We get annihilated, right? So not only do Jehovah Witnesses believe that man does not have a soul, but is one, or that he has a soul, they also state that the doctrine of man having an immortal soul is from paganism. We don't have these slides, but let me give it. This is from Insight on the Scriptures, Volume 2, 1988, pages 1005 and 1006. Quote, man came to be a living soul, hence man was not a soul. He did not have a soul as something immaterial, invisible, and intangible residing inside of him, unquote. Also in the book, Is This Life All There Is? 1974, page 43, it says, quote, how then did this belief about an immortal soul find its way into the teachings of Christendom's churches? Today, it is through the influence of pagan Greco-philosophy, unquote. So we get this idea of an immortal soul from Greek philosophy. That's what they would argue. No, we get it from the Bible, just saying. So with that, we will finish this up next week, next class. We'll look at the view of salvation and the view of the eternal state within Jehovah Witnesses. And then we will look at Christianity. What does Christianity believe? And then we will look at each one of these doctrines that we've been going through, the authority, God, the Trinity, Christ and his deity, man and his sinfulness, salvation and eternal state. And we're going to look at each one of these in response and giving a more sure response from Scripture of how to support each one of these 6 doctrines. So that's what's coming up. If you have questions about this lesson or any other, I encourage you to email us at academy@strivingforeternity.org. Also, I would like to say again, if you would be interested in purchasing my book, go to Striving for Eternity. You can also pick it up at Amazon as well. So if you're overseas and want to pick it up there, you could do that. But you can also get a Kindle version if you like that. But what do they believe? A study of the major Western religions, that is available. And a lot of what we went over today is based on that. So that would be a good resource. If you would like to have your church host one of our Bible Interpretation Made Easy seminars, that would be a wonderful thing. We would greatly appreciate it. You could find out all of the information at strivingforeternity.org. And so that is some information that we have for you. You can find out more about these classes and others at our website. Go to the Academy section and you can learn much more. We appreciate you being with us. Until next time, remember to strive to make today an eternal day for the glory of God.